Hello and welcome. Today I wanted to talk about Stephen King's Salem's Lot, the novel, and Salem's Lot, the film, directed by Toby Hooper. I'm not quite sure who wrote it. They came out. The film came out a couple of years apart from the book. Now, I'm pleased to say that I really enjoyed this film. It's a faithful adaptation. I wouldn't say very faithful and extremely faithful. Because it doesn't deviate from the plot. It has the same story. It just doesn't include. I think it includes all the characters, if I'm not mistaken, but it doesn't feature everything that's written in this book because there's a team. More in the book, there's like a gathering of a team, with Susan, Ben Mears, the priest, the doctor, the teacher, Mark Petrie, the lad. They sort of all gather as a team as the book goes on, like as each one is convinced about the vampires taking over Salem's Lot, and that's not really brought to the film. Which going in, I thought it would. I thought 3 hour runtime. I thought, okay, they're going to cover the book completely in that 3 hour runtime. And although they didn't, I'm really pleased with what they did. And having Salem's Lot brought to the visual medium was special in its own right. And how Toby Hooper brought it to the screen, especially with like the makeup of the vampires, the mood, the score really helped with the mood. The vampires were sort of, it is 1979, and the vampires were, I mean, okay, bright yellow eyes and like reddish, dirty, darker skin. And that's all it really took. And I suppose, obviously, with everything else with the production, it helped to bring these vampires to light and make them life and make them like scary and sort of like creepy, especially towards the end of the film when they're in the cellar and they're all sort of like trying to crawl towards their master, either to help him or just to quench their insatiable thirst for blood, right? Yes. So Stephen King's Salem's Lot. First time reading it. Once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. Took me over a week and a half, every day, just flicking through the pages. There are 751 pages. It's really great. It's Stephen King down to a T. He doesn't deviate from what you would expect of him. He writes a lot. He I can expect that he's murders when he's on a quest to write a book. You probably can't, you know, drive him away from the typewriter or the pen or however he writes his stories. I think there's even he writes in here as a foreword or an afterword about how his wife helps him a lot in those situations where she sort of like can put him back on the right track when he's got his head between the pages. Yes, I must say, I think the book is really scary. It's really like it really brings images to your mind as you're reading it. It's really dark. Not in terms of dark, is in terms of it literally brings. I feel like there's a lot of darkness in the story as I'm reading it, if you know what I mean. Like literally being dark and like just the mood, the visual sort of sense I get. It's not completely brought to the screen here with the darkness is what I'm trying to say. Um, which is probably a good thing actually because a lot of films they try and like use nighttime and it gets too dark and like you can't see anything and that's I hate that. So it doesn't fall victim to that actually. So I'm quite pleased with that. Um, yeah, it's a big book, big film, 3 hours long. Mark Petrie, the lad, I really like the lad. One of my standout characters. Yeah, I think the lad is Stephen King likes to write children. He likes to have them as a hero sometimes, and I think he wanted to include that here, along with a lot of his stories are kids. The whole like when you're kids you believe something, and then adults they sort of just get in the way and make things worse. I think here obviously he's going for the angle of adults being the central figures, but he also wanted to include a child in that. And he also includes children as being killed and turned into vampires and victims. But he also has this Mark Petrie who is probably taken from Stephen King's own life, where he was like the kid's into like monsters, ghouls, comics. Um, he's very attentive. He's quite a genius at points, especially in this book where he gets captured. The film doesn't portray it, but he sort of thinks of magicians and Houdini, and he sort of tenses up all of his muscles when he's captured by like the I want to say like the vampire servant. I forget his name, Striker. Um, and anyway, he's captured and tied up. But he tenses his muscles where he learnt from like a magician or previous, and then when like the evil servant goes out of the room, he sort of like relaxes, and then so therefore like the rope is the strain is taken away from his body because his muscles are decreasing in size from very tensed, and therefore he can escape. And I thought that was really clever. Um, and he eventually goes on to kill the vampire servant, which they don't do in the film, which is a miss because like it just would have elevated Mark Petrie's character on the screen. Um, yeah, and like Mark Petrie is not just like this. There isn't just like heroism about him. He is a child, and it's like believable that like he cries and he's very sad, and it's scary these situations. But he like uh, uh, does himself a service because he does march on with Ben Mears and the crew. It's really captured really well in the book. Um, Other characters. There's so I wanted to. I guess I like talking about when there's a book to screen adaptation. Is it faithful? And yes, like I said, it is faithful plot wise, but there's a lot of stuff it misses out. Let me talk over those bits. And that's not to downplay the film, but I just want to big up the book. Um, so the priest character, he's in the film. He's introduced in a very swift way. He's in and out. I think it just one scene perhaps. I don't know if we ever saw him apart from that dinner scene, which I like the way that he's swiftly introduced without the build up, because we had that in the book. We have all this build up in the book and all the background stuff, and perhaps I've got that in the book, so I shouldn't have any grievances as to it not being in the film, because otherwise I spent a lot of time reading the book, so maybe I have a swifter experience with the film. I'm okay with that. But the priest, he's set up in the book. Stephen King writes him as this figure that like the character see him as more important than what I feel he is. I feel he isn't as important, especially as like a leader of the troops. I don't think he is that, but he does have one of the greatest endings in anything I've ever read or watched, because it's so bleak and so damning of this conclusion to this story, because it means the rest of the world is infected, because he's like sort of like he's commanded by the vampire in like he saves Mark Petrie gets away after his parents are killed, because the vampire comes to just eat everyone. And anyway, the priest is, I think he's sort of like sent by the vampire to get on a coach and flee. And obviously I think he's been bitten. And it just shows that obviously he's going to go to the next town, Boston or New York, and just spread this vampirism. Yeah. Let's talk about conclusions to characters. So Susan Norton, Ben Mears' love interest. She's a much better character in the book because she has a bit of like what's the word, individuality. She's not just like reactionary as she is in the film. But her both of her conclusions in the book and the film are really great because they're emotional, because Ben Mears has to do what he has to do to her. But the film really sort of like respects her because it's after like the burning of the village and the burning of the town and the house. She comes to him. She's a vampire. Her eyes are glowing. It's oh no, and he stabs her through the heart, and it's given the respect it deserves. And obviously the respect for Ben Mears and Mark Petrie at the end of the film. So like they're off on these sort of like, they're like crusaders, aren't they? They're really scarred from what happened in the film, and now they're off, sort of like they don't really know what to do themselves. They know that the town's absolutely screwed, um, but they sort of have to carry on knowing that this world is now tainted by vampires, and evil. So yeah, that's cool. Um, yeah, the film is pretty scary, right? I imagine watching it as a kid, like you guys would have been, whoever watched it as a child would have been pretty frightened. Um, a few like jump scare moments where like the vampire appears, or like he quickly flashes on screen. And like, I mean, come on, like the boy, the Glick brothers, carried in a body bag, in a black bag, towards the sort of, at the start of the film. The butler, the servant, is collecting bodies for when the vampire eventually awakens from being transported in. That was horrific. It's horrible. And speaking on the vampire being transported into the town, I love that moment in the book because it's really like really moody. Because it's nighttime, and these two like delivery men have got all these like antiques, and the vampires they don't know it's the coffin, of course. It's just a big wooden box, and they're told to treat it with care. They're so scared. It's like, it's humorous because they're so scared, and like being a third party, just reading it, not being there. It's you could the way Stephen King writes his characters are often humorous, but like it's dead scary because they're absolutely crapping their pants. Um, Dropping padlocks and running away, and it's delivered in the film. Just yeah, it's delivered in the film. Um, yes. Yeah, I guess the film sort of delivers the film in a different pace. It sort of does it in generic how you would in a film, where like it builds up, builds up, builds up, and then it all happens, kind of thing. The last hour, where like all the bodies are being stacked up now. The whole town is being taken over and whatnot, and then Ben Mears has to crack some skulls. Um, One thing Stephen King does, he likes to sort of go off on tangents and write characters that are like awful human beings, and then they get their just desert what they deserve, and stuff like that. Anyway, he there's this sort of like subplot of the delivery company owner. I think he owns a delivery company. He big dude. He has a wife, but his wife is cheating on him, and it isn't explicitly shown in the book, which now you can see in the film it did it better, where like I didn't exactly read it, so the husband is very upset and frustrated by his wife cheating on him. I didn't really read that as such, but in the film you can really see that he is frustrated, and he's a horrible person. He treats his wife like a servant, but like you can see his motivations for what he eventually does in the film more. So what happens is he goes in on them when they're in bed together. He comes in with a shotgun, and I just love it. And the actor did a really great job. He's one of my favorite acting characters in the film. The way he did his job, because he comes in with a shotgun, sticks it like in a dude's mouth, and yeah, I just think it's a great scene. They brought Toby Hooper brought it to the screen well. It's even more effective in the film, in the book, because the dude, the guy that's running in cheating with a wife, he pisses his pants, and whatnot, and yes, but what happens in the book is like that dude that pisses his pants and runs off, he's told to never come back. Obviously, he gets bit by the vampire, and he does come back, and he scares both of them too, and he kills them. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool because like although Stephen King goes off on these tangents, whereas the characters are not so important to the plot, this time it works really well because rather than there being like a human motivation for the dude coming back and getting revenge, he's like a monster now. So it really ties into the thing that the whole like the vampires are taking over the town. Um, yeah, so I thought that worked really well. They didn't show it, but okay. They even didn't include even more deplorable characters that Stephen King wrote in this book, with like a young mother, where like this baby is even a victim of the vampires. They didn't include that. Toby Hooper probably thought, we don't want to go too much on on the horribleness of what Stephen King can, let's just focus on the vampires, which is all right and well. Um, yeah, so I mean, the film doesn't drag on 3 hours. Uh, it feels like 3 hours, but it's a good run time. Um, yeah, there's a moment where in a book where this dude like is a grave digger, but I also think he's a delivery man. I can't remember as well. Does a few jobs. Anyway, he's like the dude that like discovers the dog impaled on a fence in a graveyard. And that's really like scary. And the imagery that draws to mind when you're reading the book is quite like horrifying. Anyway, he's digging. He's putting the soil back in to one of the Glick brothers when they have a funeral for him. And in the book, like it's a really epic chapter because he's digging for his life, and you wouldn't why is it's built up in a way that he's so scared because like darkness is approaching, he's waiting for his power to help him and he hasn't come, so he's getting increasingly scared. It's getting darker. He feels that this like evilness is taking over his surrounding. He's a very nervous person. He's probably obviously superstitious because why would you feel that way? um, and like he feels compelled to open up the coffin to see that the body is in there or something, or to see that either the body's there or something to do with like bite marks or whatnot. And he eventually gets in there, and he gets infected, and it's just that was a really great scene that they don't sort of portray in the film. Um, yeah, so a lot of things are brushed over, which is understandable given the size of the book. But I just would have thought that in 3 hours they could have achieved more. But that's cool. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the nuances do come across on the screen, which is good. It's just obviously you get a lot more with the book, a lot more like you get more of a sense of like with the film. There's a happier ending because although yes, the characters do state that like the town is kind of beyond salvageable because even if you kill however many, they're still going to infect and infect and infect. But in the book, there is literally like, there's even would you call it like an epilogue where once the story's over, we visit the town or the outskirts of the town like 2 years later, and and um, that's because that's because Ben Mears and Mark Petrie got away, but they come back like a year later and they set fire to the town. They still, it's differently, but like the way they do it in the book is like more like they're sort of like rogue, sort of like highwaymen, not necessarily highwaymen, but like these agents that stand up against all the evilness in the world. They're sort of like tunnel vision, driven to sort of compelled to do this like act of finality, that burns the whole village, and to see if that works. And then we don't hear from them again. And then we go like 2 years in the future, and I think it's like snowing, and there's like a pub, a tavern, they think they call it. And then there's this bloke. He's frozen with frostbite, and he comes in, and he's like, my wife and my child, I've crashed, and I don't know where they are. Please help me. And the two dudes that are just sitting in the pub, they obviously know. So 2 years, like obviously people in the outskirts of Salem's Lot know that there's some weird stuff going on in Salem's Lot. Don't live there. Don't go there. Please don't even mention it. It's he who should not be named, kind of stuff. And they eventually do help him. They're compelled to. They're good people. Stupidly enough. And like even they're attacked by this cool. I wonder if this is because there is a sequel to Salem's Lot, the film, Return to Jerusalem's Lot. So I wonder if that's in the film. But yeah, it's a pretty cool ending. Like after the story is finished, there's like little story where these people coming up against, like, it's the fact that it's just reiterating that the vampires have gone on, and like this mother and this little child is now a vampire, and they go to hug the man, and little girl gets hit by a Bible and her face goes flying, and it's pretty cool. yeah, trying to remember all the different things that happened in the book and the film is just going to make me go on rambling. But just like to say that yeah, Salem's Lot was a good film. Really like that cover art. Yeah, and that one too for this special slip cover, I guess, from Warner Brothers. Yeah, so I did enjoy it. Thought it was a good adaptation. Um, I just would have thought that they would have included more stuff that kind of not integral to the plot, but really enhances the experience of the story. So yeah, that was Salem's Lot. Thank you.